She was a poor farmer's daughter from a forgotten German village, bedridden in a room no bigger than a pantry, yet from that narrow bed erupted visions so vivid and terrifying, so beautiful and precise, that scholars, priests, and skeptics were drawn to her like pilgrims to a burning bush. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich did not seek miracles, yet miracles hunted her down. She did not ask for the wounds of Christ, yet they blossomed on her body. She did not wish to be known, yet the world came knocking at her door. Her story is not merely the life of a mystic. It is a battle between light and darkness, waged in silence, in secret, and in a suffering soul who became a window into the hidden world of God. The thunder rolled across the Westphalian countryside on September 8, 1774, the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as Anna Katharina Emmerich entered the world in a small farmhouse near Coesfeld. She was the fifth of 9 children born to Bernard Emmerich and Anna Hillers, poor farmers who worked land they would never own, their hands perpetually cracked from labor, their table perpetually sparse. The infant's first cries mingled with the sound of rain hammering the thatched roof, a roof that leaked in a dozen places, requiring pots and pans to catch the water that dripped onto the earthen floor. From her earliest memories, Anna Katharina would later recall, the world appeared to her in 2 layers, like a painting on glass laid over ordinary sight. While other children saw only fields and forests, she saw figures of light and shadow moving through the landscape. At age 4, playing near a grove of trees while her mother worked in the nearby field, she encountered what she described as a beautiful child, radiating soft golden light, who took her hand and led her through the woods. The child showed her plants and flowers, explaining which could heal and which could harm. When Anna Katharina returned home hours later, covered in mud and brambles, her frantic mother demanded to know where she had been. With the beautiful child, she answered simply, not understanding why her mother looked at her with such strange concern. There had been no other child in those woods. The visions continued, intensifying rather than fading as childhood dreams often do. At 5 years old, while her siblings slept beside her on the straw mattress they shared, Anna Katharina would slip from bed and kneel on the cold floor, her small hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She felt compelled to pray for hours, though she barely knew any prayers beyond the simple ones her mother had taught her. When exhaustion finally claimed her and she crawled back to bed, she would fall into sleep and find herself transported to magnificent churches unlike any building in her village, soaring Gothic cathedrals with stained glass windows that turned sunlight into liquid color. In these dreams, she knelt before altars and participated in liturgies of breathtaking beauty, conducted by priests in glittering vestments. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, aching to return to those holy places. But her waking life offered no such beauty. Her family's poverty was crushing and constant. By age 6, Anna Katharina was already working, watching younger siblings, fetching water from the well, gathering firewood, helping her mother card wool in the evenings by the weak light of a tallow candle. Her father, Bernard, was a kind but broken man, worn down by labor that never quite yielded enough to feed his growing family. Her mother, though loving, was hardened by necessity, quick to scold and slow to praise, always calculating how to stretch one loaf of bread across 9 hungry mouths. At age 7, Anna Katharina experienced something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was tending a small flock of sheep in a meadow when she saw, as clearly as she saw the grass beneath her feet, a vision of souls in purgatory. They appeared as figures shrouded in flame and shadow, reaching toward her with desperate, imploring gestures. Their silent anguish was so palpable that she collapsed to her knees, weeping and praying with an intensity that frightened the sheep into scattering. From that day forward, she felt their suffering as a physical weight upon her small shoulders. She began to secretly offer up her food, hiding portions of her already meager meals and going hungry, believing somehow that her sacrifice might ease their torment. Her mother, noticing the child growing thinner, assumed she was simply a poor eater and scolded her for wasting away. The parish church in Coesfeld became Anna Katharina's refuge and her obsession. Every Sunday, when the family made the long walk to Mass, she drank in every detail, the smell of incense, the flicker of candles, the drone of Latin she couldn't understand, but which moved her to tears nonetheless. She began slipping away from her chores whenever possible to visit the church, stealing moments to kneel before the tabernacle or gaze at the statue of Mary. The priest, noticing this peculiar child who seemed to pray with the fervor of a much older soul, began to take interest in her. He arranged for her to receive basic religious instruction and, when she was old enough, to make her first Holy Communion. The day of her first communion, at age 11, became a turning point in Anna Katharina's interior life. As the priest placed the consecrated host upon her tongue, she later described experiencing a sensation like fire coursing through her body, as if every cell had suddenly become aware of a presence. She saw, though whether with her physical eyes or some inner sight, she could never quite explain, the infant Jesus appear before her, radiant and smiling. He seemed to embrace her, and in that embrace, she felt her heart physically wounded, as though pierced by an arrow of divine love. She staggered back from the communion rail and nearly fainted. The other children giggled nervously. The priest caught her arm and steadied her, but he saw something in her eyes that silenced his questions. He simply led her back to her pew, where she knelt in trembling silence for the remainder of the Mass. After her first communion, Anna Katharina's mystical experiences escalated dramatically. She began to experience what later mystics would call dark nights of the soul, periods where God seemed utterly absent, where her prayers felt like words thrown into a void. During these periods, she was tormented by terrible temptations and what she described as attacks from demonic forces. She would wake in the night to find her room filled with grotesque shadows that mocked her prayers and whispered that she was mad, that her visions were delusions, that she should abandon this path and live like a normal girl. But between these dark nights came experiences of indescribable sweetness. She had visions of biblical scenes unfolding before her as if she were present. She saw Abraham preparing to sacrifice Isaac, Moses before the burning bush, David facing Goliath. Most frequently, she witnessed scenes from the life of Christ, his birth in Bethlehem, his preaching in Galilee, his agony in Gethsemane. These visions were not vague or dreamlike, but precise and detailed, filled with sensory information. She could describe the texture of the rough wool garments worn by shepherds, the specific species of flowers growing near the well where Jesus spoke to the Samaritan woman, the exact layout of the rooms in the house at Nazareth. As Anna Katharina grew into adolescence, her family's expectation was simple. She would marry a local farmer, bear children, and live the same hardscrabble existence her mother had endured. But the girl had other ideas. By age 14, she had become convinced that God was calling her to religious life, to become a nun. When she timidly mentioned this to her mother, the response was harsh and immediate. Religious life? For the daughter of a peasant? Do you know what convents require? A dowry. Money we don't have. Stop filling your head with foolish dreams and focus on your work. But Anna Katharina could not let the dream die. She began to scheme and plan. If her family couldn't provide a dowry, she would earn one herself. She took on additional work, hiring herself out to wealthier families as a seamstress. Her skill with needle and thread was exceptional, her stitches so fine, and even that they seemed almost supernatural in their precision. She worked by candlelight long into the night, her fingers bleeding from countless needle pricks, saving every pfennig she earned. At age 18, she finally approached her parents again. She had saved a small amount, though nowhere near what most convents required. "Please," she begged, "let me try. Let me at least inquire." Her father, moved by her determination if not convinced of its wisdom, reluctantly agreed. Her mother's consent came with bitter warnings about disappointment and the harshness of the world beyond their village. Anna Katerina began visiting convents in the region, presenting herself as a candidate for religious life. The pattern repeated itself with crushing regularity. The prioress or mother superior would receive her kindly enough, ask about her family background, and then delicately inquire about her dowry. When Anna Katerina named the pittance she had saved, faces would close like doors. "I'm sorry, my child, but our community requires. We have standards. Perhaps if you could return when you've saved more." She was rejected by the Trappistans, by the Benedictines, by every established community she approached. Desperate and heartbroken, Anna Katerina made a decision that would prove fateful. If she could not enter a convent as a choir nun, she would learn a skill that might make her acceptable as a lay sister, a servant within the convent who performed manual labor. She apprenticed herself to a seamstress in Coesfeld named Clara Sonken, agreeing to work for room and board while learning the trade thoroughly. The years with Clara Sonken, from 1794 to 1802, were years of profound suffering and growth. Clara was a devout woman but also a harsh taskmaster, driving her young apprentice relentlessly. Anna Katerina worked from before dawn until late at night, her fingers perpetually sore, her eyes strained from close work in poor light. But Clara was also a woman of deep faith, and she recognized something extraordinary in her apprentice. When Anna Katerina thought herself alone, Clara would sometimes glimpse her kneeling in prayer, her face transfigured with an unearthly light, tears streaming down her cheeks. Objects seemed to move in Anna Katerina's presence. More than once, Clara entered a room to find her apprentice levitating several inches above the floor, lost in ecstatic prayer. During these years, Anna Katerina's mystical life deepened in ways that both exalted and terrified her. She began to experience what mystics call the spiritual espousals, a sense of being united with Christ in a bond more intimate than any earthly marriage. In visions, she saw herself clothed in bridal garments, standing before an altar with Christ himself as her spouse. These experiences filled her with joy so intense it was almost painful, a bliss that made ordinary happiness seem like pallid shadow. But they also brought new sufferings. She became acutely sensitive to sin, not just her own, but the sins of others around her. Walking through Coesfeld streets, she could sense the moral state of souls she passed, and the awareness of human wickedness sometimes overwhelmed her. She would return to Clara's house and weep for hours, praying desperately for the conversion of sinners. She began taking on voluntary penances, fasting beyond what the church required, sleeping on bare boards instead of even the simple straw mattress Clara provided, binding her flesh with rough cords that cut into her skin. In 1802, after 8 years of apprenticeship, Anna Katerina was finally ready to try again. She had mastered the seamstress's trade and could offer convents genuine skill. With Clara's recommendation and her new credentials, she approached the Augustinian convent of Agnetenburg in Dulmen. The prioress, desperate for a skilled seamstress and impressed by the young woman's obvious piety, agreed to accept her, but with a crushing condition. Anna Katerina's childhood friend, Clara Sonken's daughter, also named Clara, wanted to enter religious life but lacked both the skills and the educational background the convent required. The prioress made it clear both would be accepted, or neither. For Anna Katerina, it meant taking on an almost impossible burden. She would have to teach young Clara not only basic reading and writing but also Latin, music, and all the knowledge required of choir nuns. It would be done in secret. After the long hours of manual labor, she would perform as a lay sister, stolen from the few hours meant for sleep. But she didn't hesitate. After 13 years of yearning, after countless rejections, after endless labor and suffering, the door was finally opening. On November 13, 1802, at the age of 28, Anna Katerina Emmerich crossed the threshold of Agnetenburg Convent and began her life as a religious sister. She had no way of knowing that the greatest trials of her life still lay ahead, or that this humble convent would be the place where her hidden mystical gifts would finally, inevitably, be revealed to the world. The heavy wooden door of Agnetenburg Convent closed behind Anna Katharina Emmerich with a sound like finality itself, shutting out the world she had known for 28 years. She stood in the entrance hall with her small bundle of possessions, so few they barely filled a cloth sack, and breathed in the scent of beeswax and old stone. This was it. This was the life she had fought for, sacrificed for, dreamed of since childhood. Yet as the prioress led her down the dim corridor toward the novitiate, Anna Katharina felt a tremor of apprehension run through her. The visions that had blessed and tormented her for so long had shown her many things, but they had not prepared her for the reality of community life with women who had no idea what moved within her soul. The daily routine of the convent was rigorous, rising at midnight for matins, prayers throughout the day marking the canonical hours, Mass each morning, and between these devotions, endless work. For Anna Katharina, assigned to the lowliest tasks as a lay sister, the work was backbreaking. She scrubbed floors on her knees until they bled, hauled water from the well, worked in the convent's gardens in all weather, and spent long hours in the laundry, her hands raw from lye soap and cold water. And every night, after her sisters had gone to their cells for sleep, she crept to young Clara's room to fulfill her desperate bargain, teaching the girl Latin declensions by candlelight, drilling her in Gregorian chant, explaining theological concepts that she herself had learned more through mystical insight than formal education. The other nuns soon began to notice that something was different about Sister Anna Katharina. She seemed to need almost no sleep, yet she never appeared exhausted. She ate almost nothing at meals, pushing her food around her plate and slipping portions into her napkin when she thought no one was watching, yet she labored harder than women who consumed 3 full meals daily. During prayer, she would fall into states of such profound absorption that she seemed unaware of her surroundings. Once, a sister accidentally dropped a heavy candlestick beside her during meditation, and Anna Katharina didn't even flinch. But it was in the chapel that the most disturbing phenomena occurred. Sister Maria, an elderly nun who often rose early for private prayer, began to report strange occurrences. She claimed that she had seen Anna Katharina kneeling before the altar in the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by a faint luminescence that seemed to emanate from her body itself. Another sister reported passing the chapel at midnight and hearing Anna Katharina speaking in low, urgent tones, but when she peered inside, the young nun was utterly alone, seemingly conversing with invisible presences. The prioress, Mother von Lilien, was a practical woman who had little patience for religious enthusiasm that disrupted convent routine. She called Anna Katharina to her office one winter morning in 1803, 3 months after the young woman's arrival. "Sister Anna Katharina," she began sternly, "reports have reached me of irregularities in your behavior. You must understand that this community values order and discretion. Whatever private devotions you feel moved to practice, they must not disturb your sisters or draw attention to yourself. The sin of pride—" "Mother Prioress," Anna Katharina interrupted softly, her eyes downcast, I do not seek attention. I would give anything to be as other sisters are. But I cannot control," she trailed off, uncertain how to explain visions and experiences that she herself barely understood. Mother von Lilien's expression softened slightly. She had been a prioress long enough to distinguish between genuine spiritual phenomena and mere hysteria. There was something in this young woman's humility, something in the way she seemed almost ashamed of her gifts, that suggested authenticity. "Very well," she said finally, "but you will exercise greater discretion, and you will speak of these matters to no one except your confessor." The confessor assigned to Agnetenburg Convent was Father Limburg, an elderly priest of considerable learning but limited imagination. When Anna Katharina first entered the confessional and began, haltingly, to describe her mystical experiences, he listened with growing alarm. Visions of Christ? Conversations with angels? Awareness of souls in purgatory? It all sounded dangerously like the enthusiasm of the Illuminati or other heretical sects that had troubled the church in recent decades. "My child," he said firmly through the screen, "you must be very careful. The devil often disguises himself as an angel of light. These visions you describe, have you considered that they might be temptations designed to lead you into spiritual pride? I advise you to dismiss them from your mind, to focus on simple, humble obedience to the rule." Anna Katerina left the confessional with a heart heavier than when she had entered. She had hoped for guidance, for someone who might help her navigate the strange landscape of her interior life. Instead, she had been told to reject the very experiences that had defined her since childhood. She tried to follow Father Limburg's advice, tried to shut out the visions when they came, but it was like trying to stop breathing. The mystical experiences were not something she chose. They chose her. In the spring of 1804, something happened that would make discretion impossible. Anna Katerina was working in the convent garden, preparing the soil for planting, when she was suddenly seized by a vision of such intensity that she collapsed among the rows of vegetables. She found herself transported to Jerusalem, not the Jerusalem of her own time, but the ancient city during Holy Week. She was walking the Via Dolorosa, watching Christ carry his cross through streets choked with hostile crowds. She could hear the jeering voices, smell the sweat and blood, feel the oppressive heat of the Middle Eastern sun. She saw Simon of Cyrene pressed into service, saw Veronica push through the crowd with her veil, saw Christ stumble and fall under the weight of the cross. The vision was so vivid, so consuming, that Anna Katerina began to physically live what she was seeing. Her body contorted as if under the weight of an invisible burden. She cried out in Aramaic, a language she had never studied, words that the sisters who found her lying in the garden could not understand. When they carried her to her cell, she continued to writhe and moan, reliving Christ's crucifixion moment by moment. At 3 p.m, the traditional hour of Christ's death, she let out a terrible cry and fell silent, lying as still as a corpse. Mother von Lillian summoned Father Limburg immediately. The priest arrived to find the entire convent in an uproar, nuns whispering in frightened clusters, some praying, others demanding that Anna Katerina be removed from the community as a disruptive influence or possibly possessed by demons. He entered her cell to find her lying on her simple cot, her face pale as death, but marked with an expression of such profound peace that it gave him pause. As he watched, her eyes opened, focusing slowly on his face. "Father," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "I have seen such terrible things. And such beautiful things. He suffered so much. More than we can ever imagine. But his love..." Tears began to flow down her cheeks. His love was greater still. Over the following weeks, Father Limburg interviewed Anna Katerina extensively, testing her, questioning her, trying to determine if what she experienced was divine revelation, demonic deception, or simple madness. He was startled by the precision of her descriptions, architectural details of ancient Jerusalem that she, an uneducated peasant girl, could not possibly have known. He consulted theological texts and found that her visions aligned with Orthodox teaching, containing no heresies or errors against the faith. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to believe that he was dealing with an authentic mystic. But belief brought new problems. Word of the visionary nun of Dulmen began to spread beyond the convent walls. Curious visitors started arriving, requesting to see Sister Anna Katerina, hoping to witness her ecstasies or receive prophecies. Mother von Lillian found herself in an impossible position. She could not deny the supernatural nature of what was happening, but neither could she allow her convent to become a circus of religious spectacle. The solution, when it came, was harsh. In 1806, Anna Katerina was effectively confined to her cell except for absolutely necessary activities. She was forbidden from speaking to visitors, forbidden from discussing her visions with anyone except Father Limburg, and assigned even more grueling manual labor in an attempt to ground her in physical reality. The other nuns, divided in their opinions about her, mostly kept their distance, some from reverence, others from fear or resentment. It was during this period of isolation that Anna Katerina's mystical experiences took a darker turn. She began to experience what she called expiatory suffering, physical pain that she understood to be redemptive, united with Christ's passion for the salvation of souls. She would wake in the night with agonizing headaches that felt like a crown of thorns pressing into her skull. Her hands and feet would throb and burn as if pierced by nails. Her side would ache as if wounded by a lance. In December 1812, the pain in her hands became so intense that she could no longer hide it. During evening prayers, another sister noticed blood seeping through the bandages Anna Katerina had wrapped around her palms. When confronted, Anna Katerina unwrapped the cloths with trembling hands to reveal wounds, not cuts or abrasions, but perfect circular marks on both palms, as if something had pierced straight through from one side to the other. The stigmata, the very wounds of Christ crucified. Mother von Lillian stared at those bloody palms in horror and wonder. She knew what this meant. Whatever Anna Katerina Emmerich was, she was no longer a secret that could be kept within convent walls. The world would demand to see these wounds, to judge their authenticity, to make this peasant girl into either a saint or a scandal. But before the full implications of the stigmata could unfold, a greater catastrophe struck. In 1811, the Kingdom of Westphalia, under Napoleon's brother Jerome Bonaparte, had decreed the suppression of numerous monasteries and convents throughout the region. Agnetenburg, small and poor, was marked for closure. The nuns had clung to hope that they might be spared, but in the autumn of 1812, the final order came. The convent would be dissolved. The sisters would be dispersed, forced to return to their families or find other communities willing to receive them. For Anna Katerina, the news was devastating. The convent had been her refuge, her home, the answer to decades of prayers and struggles. To lose it now felt like a divine abandonment almost too cruel to bear. Where would she go? Her family's tiny farmhouse had no room for her, and even if it did, how could she explain the stigmata, the visions, the supernatural phenomena that now marked her days? On November 13th, 1812, exactly 10 years after she had entered Agnetenburg, Anna Katerina walked out through the same heavy wooden door, carrying the same small bundle of possessions. But she was no longer the hopeful young woman who had arrived. Her hands were wrapped in bloody bandages. Her body bore wounds that no doctor could explain or heal. And following behind her, drawn by rumors and curiosity, came the first trickle of what would become a flood. People who believed she was a living saint, people who were certain she was a fraud, doctors determined to study her, priests uncertain whether to bless or exorcise her. A local priest, Father Limburg, who had remained her spiritual director despite his initial skepticism, arranged lodging for her in the small house of a widow, the elderly Frau Retters. Anna Katerina climbed the narrow stairs to a small room under the eaves, a room that would become famous across Europe, a room she would never leave again except to be carried to her grave. As she lay down on the simple bed that first night, her wounded hands throbbing with pain, she had no way of knowing that her greatest trials and her most profound revelations still lay ahead. The door to the world had opened, and the world was coming to meet her. The room measured barely 12 feet square, with a single window that looked out over Dulmen's modest streets and the spire of the parish church beyond. A simple wooden crucifix hung on the wall opposite the bed, and beneath it, a small table held a flickering candle and a worn rosary. This was the entire world of Anna Katerina Emmerich now, a world that paradoxically grew smaller in physical dimension even as it expanded into realms beyond ordinary human comprehension. By the summer of 1813, Anna Katerina could no longer rise from her bed. The stigmata wounds, now visible not only on her hands and feet, but also on her side, corresponding to the lance wound of Christ, refused to heal, bleeding regularly and causing excruciating pain. But it was more than the wounds. Her entire body seemed to be breaking down, consumed by mysterious ailments that left doctors baffled and helpless. She developed what appeared to be bedsores of supernatural origin, her flesh literally decomposing in places, as if she were already a corpse. Fevers came and went with no apparent cause. Most bizarrely, she seemed to have lost almost entirely the ability to consume food or water. Frau Reiters, the elderly widow who had taken her in, watched in mounting alarm as her tenant declined. She brought broth, bread soaked in milk, wine diluted with water, anything that might be palatable to an invalid. But Anna Katerina could manage only a few drops before her throat would constrict and she would begin to retch violently. The only thing she could tolerate, and barely, was the consecrated host of Holy Communion. On the days when Father Limburg brought her the Eucharist, she would receive it with tears of desperate gratitude, and it seemed to sustain her in ways that defied all natural law. The townspeople of Dulmen were divided in their response to the bedridden stigmatic in their midst. Some believed they were witnessing a genuine miracle, a living saint whose sufferings were redemptive and whose prayers were powerful. They would climb the stairs to her room with requests, "Intercede for my sick child, pray for my husband who has lost his faith, ask God to spare our crops from the drought." Anna Katerina, despite her agony, received them all with gentle compassion, promising to remember their needs in her prayers. Others were convinced she was a fraud, a hysteric seeking attention through self-mutilation and theatrical displays of piety. The rumors spread. She inflicted the wounds on herself with sharp instruments when no one was watching. She survived by secretly eating at night. The whole thing was an elaborate deception designed to extract money from the gullible. These skeptics demanded investigation, scientific examination, proof. In the autumn of 1813, the ecclesiastical authorities, under pressure from both believers and skeptics, ordered a formal investigation. A commission was established, led by Dr. Wiesner, the local physician, along with several priests and civic officials. For 3 weeks, Anna Katerina was subjected to the most humiliating scrutiny imaginable. The investigators set up a rotation of watchers who observed her constantly, day and night, recording everything she did or said. They examined her wounds minutely, probing them with instruments to determine their depth and nature. They searched her room repeatedly for hidden food or implements that might be used for self-harm. They questioned Frau Reiters relentlessly, looking for any sign of conspiracy or deception. Dr. Wiesner approached the investigation as a skeptic, fully expecting to expose a fraud. But what he witnessed over those 3 weeks slowly transformed his certainty into bewildered doubt, and finally into reluctant belief. The wounds, when examined closely, showed characteristics that defied natural explanation. They penetrated completely through the hands and feet, yet showed no signs of infection despite being constantly open and bleeding. The blood that flowed from them had a peculiar sweet odor, nothing like the fetid smell of typical suppurating wounds. Most remarkably, during one of her ecstasies, he watched the wound in her side open and close rhythmically, blood flowing more freely when she entered states of mystical communion. The surveillance confirmed that she consumed no food. Watchers stationed in her room reported that she neither ate nor drank, yet somehow maintained consciousness and could even sit up in bed to receive visitors. Dr. Wiesner, trained in the best medical science of his era, could offer no natural explanation. He had personally observed cases of hysteria, knew the theatrical symptoms of patients seeking attention. This was something entirely different. But the most unsettling aspect of the investigation came from what Anna Katerina said during her ecstasies. She would fall into trance states, sometimes lasting hours, during which she seemed utterly unaware of her surroundings. Her eyes would remain open but unseeing, fixed on invisible scenes. She would speak continuously, describing in minute detail visions of biblical events, of the lives of saints, of mystical journeys through heaven, purgatory, and even hell. The investigators recorded her words, filling page after page with descriptions so vivid and precise that they seemed more like eyewitness accounts than imaginative fantasies. On one occasion, she described a vision of the Virgin Mary's childhood in the Temple of Jerusalem. She spoke of the specific layout of the rooms where Mary lived, the daily routines of the young virgins dedicated to God's service, the types of handwork they performed, the prayers they recited. She described the texture of Mary's garments, the food served at meals, the oil lamps that lit the corridors at night. The level of detail was staggering, and it all came from a peasant woman who had never traveled more than a few miles from her birthplace, who had never studied ancient history or archaeology, whose only education had come from catechism lessons and her own mystical experiences. The commission concluded its investigation in November 1813 with a cautious report. They could find no evidence of fraud or deception. The phenomena appeared genuine, though whether they were of divine or demonic origin, or perhaps some unknown natural cause, the commission could not definitively say. The Church, in its wisdom, chose neither to condemn nor to officially endorse Anna Catherine. She would be neither declared a saint nor denounced as a heretic. She would simply be observed. For Anna Catherine herself, the investigation had been a torment worse than her physical sufferings. To have strangers probing her wounds, watching her in her most vulnerable moments, questioning her sincerity, it felt like a violation of something sacred. When it was finally over, she wept with relief, begging Father Limburg to ensure it would never happen again. But the investigation, rather than settling the matter, had only increased public fascination with the stigmata of dolmen. Visitors arrived in increasing numbers, nobility from across Germany, priests and monks seeking spiritual wisdom, doctors hoping to study her medically, writers and intellectuals drawn by curiosity. Frau Retters found herself running a constant stream of traffic up and down the narrow stairs. Among the visitors who arrived in September 1818 was a man who would change everything, Clemens Brentano, one of Germany's most celebrated romantic poets. Brentano came to Dolmen as a skeptic, half convinced he would find a simple peasant woman engaged in pious fraud. Instead, he encountered someone who would consume the remaining years of his life. Their first meeting was awkward. Brentano, urbane and sophisticated, accustomed to the salons of Berlin and the intellectual circles of Heidelberg, felt out of place in this cramped room with its smell of sickness and sanctity. Anna Catherine, weak and pain-ridden, regarded this famous man with apprehension. What did he want from her? But as Brentano began to speak with her, to listen to her describe her visions, he found himself mesmerized. Here was material beyond anything his literary imagination had conceived, visions of such power and detail that they seemed to open windows into another world entirely. He made a proposal. He would visit regularly and record her visions, preserving them for posterity. Anna Catherine, always obedient to what seemed the will of God, agreed. For the next 6 years, Brentano came to that little room almost daily, sitting beside her bed with pen and paper, recording everything she said during her ecstatic states. The visions came with particular intensity during Lent, when Anna Catherine would relive the Passion of Christ day by day, hour by hour. Brentano watched in horror and fascination as she writhed in her bed, experiencing the scourging, the crowning with thorns, the carrying of the cross, the crucifixion itself. Blood would flow more freely from her wounds during these times. Her body would contort into positions that mimicked Christ's suffering on the cross. But she also described scenes of breathtaking beauty, the Annunciation, with the Archangel Gabriel appearing to Mary in a chamber filled with supernatural light. The Nativity, with details of the cave in Bethlehem that seemed impossibly precise, the wedding feast at Cana, where she could describe the water jars, the quality of the wine, the expressions on the faces of the servants who witnessed the miracle. She spoke of the hidden life of Jesus, The years in Nazareth about which the Gospels say almost nothing, describing his childhood, his relationship with Mary and Joseph, the small miracles of his growing years. Brentano filled thousands of pages with these accounts. Sometimes he worked late into the night, transcribing his hastily scribbled notes into more coherent narratives. He was aware that many would dismiss these visions as the fevered imaginings of a dying woman, but he had sat there, had watched her face, had heard the conviction in her voice. Whatever the source of these visions, they possessed a reality and power that mere human invention could not achieve. The physical toll on Anna Katerina during these years was devastating. By 1820, her body was so wasted that she appeared to be nothing but skin stretched over bones. The wounds continued to bleed, never healing, creating an almost constant need for fresh bandages. She developed mysterious marks on her body, what appeared to be the imprint of the cross on her chest, and strange symbols that would appear and disappear on her skin. She experienced what mystics call diabolical attacks, terrifying nights when her room seemed filled with demonic presences that mocked her, threatened her, and tormented her with visions of her own damnation. Yet through all this suffering, she maintained an extraordinary serenity. Visitors were struck by the peace that seemed to emanate from her, despite her obvious agony. She never complained, never asked why God had chosen this path for her. When people thanked her for her prayers or her sufferings offered for their intentions, she would simply smile and say, "It is nothing. Our Lord suffered so much more." In the winter of 1823, Anna Katerina's condition deteriorated sharply. The wounds, which had bled regularly for over a decade, began to suppurate in ways they never had before. Infections set in that even the supernatural character of her affliction could not prevent. Dr. Wiesner, who had remained her physician and had grown deeply devoted to her, could see that the end was approaching. Brentano, sensing that his time with her was limited, intensified his efforts to record her visions. Anna Katerina, aware that she was dying, seemed to have a final surge of mystical experiences. She spoke of seeing the future of the Church, trials and persecutions that would come, but also renewal and triumph. She described in detail the lives of obscure saints, some of whose very existence had been forgotten by history. She mapped out the geography of the Holy Land with such precision that later archaeologists would consult Brentano's published accounts. On February 1st, 1824, Anna Katerina received the last rites. Father Limburg, now an old man himself, anointed the wounds that had bled for Christ, gave her final absolution, and placed the Eucharist on her tongue one last time. She had not been able to speak for several days, but when she received communion, her face lit with joy. For 8 more days she lingered, drifting in and out of consciousness. Brentano sat beside her bed constantly, holding her hand, praying. Frau Ritters kept vigil, along with several of the townspeople who had grown to love the strange, suffering woman. On the night of February 8th, the room seemed filled with an unusual stillness. The candle beside her bed flickered, but did not go out. At midnight, the same hour when she had risen for matins during her years in the convent, Anna Katerina Emmerich opened her eyes one final time. Those present would later swear that her face, so wasted and pain-marked, suddenly appeared young and beautiful, radiant with an inner light. Her lips moved, forming words that Brentano strained to hear. "Lord Jesus, I come." And then she was gone. The stigmata wounds, which had bled for 12 years, suddenly dried. The ravaged body, which had defied all natural laws of survival, finally yielded to death. She was 49 years old. The funeral, held 3 days later, drew crowds from across Westphalia. They came to pay respects to the stigmatic, the visionary, the suffering servant who had lived among them. As her coffin was carried through the streets of Dulmen toward the cemetery, people reached out to touch it, seeking some final blessing. She was buried in a simple grave, marked with a plain wooden cross. In the years that followed, Clemens Brentano would labor to organize and publish the thousands of pages he had recorded at her bedside. The resulting books, The Dolorous Passion of Our Lord Jesus Christ and the Life of the Blessed Virgin Mary, would be read by millions and would inspire countless souls, including future popes and saints. Skeptics would continue to debate the authenticity of her visions, the reality of her stigmata, the possibility that it all had been elaborate delusion or fraud. But those who had known her, who had climbed those narrow stairs and sat beside that bed of sorrows, who had witnessed her gentleness in the midst of agony, her joy despite suffering, her absolute conviction that every pain she endured had meaning and purpose, they knew they had been in the presence of something extraordinary. Whether miracle or mystery, divine gift or sacred riddle, Anne Catherine Emmerich had lived a life that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human experience. The little room above the priest's house in Dulmen stood empty after her death, but pilgrims continued to visit it for decades, seeking some trace of the presence that had once filled it with light. And in that room, if one listened carefully in the silence, one could almost hear the echo of her voice, speaking words of vision and prophecy, of suffering and hope, of a reality beyond the veil, where this peasant woman had walked as easily as others walk the streets of their hometown. She had lived between two worlds, her body broken on the border between earth and heaven. And in that breaking, she had revealed glimpses of glory that the world would not soon forget.